Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Blessings, good evening. For many Buddhists or people interested to follow the Buddhist teachings, a doubt that often arises is concerning how to be a good friend to someone else who's maybe suffering or in need of support. It's a question I'm often asked as a monk. People will tell me about somebody else who's suffering and say, what can I do to help them? So one way in the Buddhist teachings we define good or true friendship is, we say a true friend brings you to the Dhamma, brings you to the truth, brings you to understand the truth or practice the Dhamma, or at least furthers your own practice in some way towards understanding the truth. And in the same way, we talk about a false friend who, whatever they do, they tend to take you away from the Dhamma, confuse you, obstruct you, make problems for you. So the practice of the Dhamma is harder. That also, this truth also applies to yourself, in the sense, if you're considering your own Dhamma practice, your own life, your mind, your meditation, all these things, you could ask yourself, how good a friend am I being to myself? Because we all know that we have times in our life when we indulge in more negative emotions and more unskillful habits and perhaps don't make much effort to change. So you might say those times are the times when we're not being the best of friends to ourselves. We do things, we say things, we do things which lead us into more suffering, away from the Dhamma. Sometimes just the way we think, we're not willing to give up a way of thinking that is making us feel more stressed, more anxious, more unhappy in one way or another. Sometimes because we're just deluded and don't realize, but sometimes we even realize or half realize, but we're just not willing to let go of a certain way of thinking. And obvious one is when you're angry, and if you are being a good friend to yourself, when you're angry you would always make an effort to abandon the anger, as the Buddha encouraged us to do. But sometimes we're not being a good friend to ourselves and we try to hold on to the anger, justify it, blame someone else, find excuses, and we just keep going with it and indulge it, maybe for a long time, repeatedly for days, months, even years. So whether it's to be a good friend, a Dhamma friend to another person, or to yourself, we have to take the time to consider what that means. And you probably know that famous phrase from the Buddha about how when he Venerable Ananda made the comment to the Buddha that he thought that being a true Dhamma friend, Kalyana Mitta, was so important that you could say it's like half of the practice. It's that important. And the Buddha answered, no, don't say that, Ananda. The being a Kalyana Mitta and practicing developing the qualities of a good friend, Dhamma friend, are the whole of the practice. So it's, in one way you could say it's synonymous with practicing the Buddhist teachings, is being a good friend to yourself. And being a good friend to yourself brings you to practice these Buddhist teachings. Dana, generosity, sila, morality, bhavana, meditation. A good friend encourages you in these practices. And your own thinking can be your own good friend. So you develop the intention to practice generosity, to uphold the precepts, to develop mindfulness, states of samadhi, and then to contemplate the Dhamma. That's what a good friend does. Whether we're talking to ourselves, which we do sometimes in our mind, or talking outwardly to others, you could say this is part of our practice, just being a good friend to others. It's the practice of metta. And metta and bhavana, metta and meditation go hand in hand. The cultivating the object of goodwill, kindness, is obviously one kind of meditation. But it's just also just an attitude you develop through your life. If you call life meditation or meditation life, then yes, you can say that the practice of metta meditation is the whole of life. Because whether you're actually sitting cross-legged on a meditation cushion or walking meditation or doing any other kind of activity, the aim is to cultivate metta, goodwill, for yourself, for others. But of course, there are challenges to that because we have accumulated karma, mental defilements that cloud our view, distract us, confuse us, delude us into holding on to strong, wrong views sometimes. Because of that, we need to keep regenerating metta over and over again, keep coming back to developing metta. Because we run out and forget, like any other meditation, like the breathing meditation, metta meditation, you forget. Sometimes you have it, sometimes you lose it. Sometimes there's reasons why you lose your goodwill and your kindness and you're being trying to be a Dhamma friend, but the mind is not coping very well. Maybe that's because you're tired or physically in pain or ill, or sometimes because we have a lot of impingement. Memories come up about previous suffering, and that takes away our metta or uses up our metta, as it were. Sometimes it's from external things. Other people don't understand us or don't like us or competing with us, and so they cause us suffering and our metta disappears, maybe. So we need to keep cultivating metta over and over again, and the qualities of being a good friend, Dhamma friend. With other people, often it's hard, isn't it? If someone else is suffering, but there's not much you can do to really remove the feeling of suffering from their experience. Maybe all you can do is wish them well. And it sometimes seems a little bit weak or ineffective, just wishing someone well when they're in pain, obviously when they're ill or experiencing the loss of a loved one, or having some kind of difficult time in their life, to just wish them well sometimes seems a bit weak, not very satisfactory. But still, it's the only choice, isn't it? As a good friend to someone else who's suffering, you may not be able to alleviate their suffering very much, or not at all, but you can still wish them well and wish them to be free from suffering. All human beings wish to be free from suffering. I don't think there's much doubt about that. Where the doubts and the uncertainties come in is how you achieve the ending of suffering. Sometimes we get it wrong, and the things we do actually increase our suffering or the suffering of others. So again, being a good Dhamma friend is understanding the path more and more, so that you can encourage others as they deal with pain and suffering, as they practice the Dhamma, and not lead them in the wrong direction. When our friends overcome their suffering or recover or somehow improve, then we can adjust and we develop the quality of mudita, sympathetic, appreciative joy. So if your friend was ill and then they get better, us, the Dhamma friend, we share in the happiness of their coming out of their illness or recovering from their injury, or whatever other difficulties people are suffering. When they recover from them or they pass, they can have, then we can have mudita for them. And that's an important test of your metta. If somebody else is no longer suffering or has come out of some suffering, and we recognize that and then we rejoice, this is what we call mudita. It has to come from metta as a starting point. There has to be goodwill, friendliness, friendship. So cultivating the qualities of a good friend are one and the same with developing this path of practice that the Buddha gave us. The qualities that you're encouraging in yourself, such as mindfulness, the ability to contemplate the Dhamma, listen to the Dhamma, reflect on it, and then understand it more deeply. And these abilities are what we're encouraging from a place of metta, encouraging in ourselves, encouraging in others. Because life is a mixture, isn't it? We do experience some happiness. We don't want suffering. But it's not always under our control, because we've all created karma in the past, and we're receiving the fruits of karma over and over again. So you can't always control or avoid different kinds of karma coming up, both good and bad, because the causes and the conditions are already in place, maybe from a long time previously. And we need a lot of patience to cope with that fact. Just the karma of being born a human being. When they say, when you're born as a human being, well, consciousness enters the embryo. When your embryo is formed in mother's womb, consciousness joins it. So there's mind joining body or form. And then a baby grows, and eventually mum gives birth to that baby. But it's already happening in the womb. Consciousness already wanted birth from the time it was in the womb. Then birth takes place and we grow up from childhood to youth to being an adult, a young adult maybe. Nobody wants suffering when they enter the womb of the mother. and then is born as a baby. And no baby born into the world is expecting or wanting suffering. But it's just the nature, the karma of having a human body. You'll experience suffering because human bodies change every day and they experience weather and cold and hunger and tiredness, and then the pains of aging as we grow. But nobody really accepts that or thinks of that. When a baby is born, everyone is hoping that that baby will live for basically forever and ever, certainly an indeterminate number of years. But a human body doesn't do that. A human body grows older every day, and with aging we get sickness, imperfections, pain, discomfort, and so on. So say in the case of old age, sickness and death, that's another kind of friendship, isn't it? We all experience old age, sickness and death. And when I say old age, I mean aging. Even a kid experiences aging as their body changes. But we're all in the same position. We all experience aging, sickness, and ultimately death. Death of our loved ones, death of ourselves. We're all friends in that. We all have that common experience. So that's a place where our understanding of Dhamma can grow, and our sympathy, compassion, kindness can grow, just knowing that much, that we're all going to have to face this same problem. As you notice in the world, people suffer a lot by not accepting this simple fact that the human body that we inhabit ages, and with aging we get pain, discomfort, illness, and then we get death. If you can encourage your friend to meditate, it helps them to deal with this very well. Because what happens when you meditate, you're learning to practice mindfulness, pay attention to what's going on, train your mind to let go of the distracted states that hide the truth. Normally when you meditate you find it difficult because your mind daydreams, wanders around, thinks a lot, worries a lot, or sometimes just falls asleep. Sometimes we have aches and pains bothering us and they distract us too. But if you as a good friend encourage either yourself to meditate, and sometimes you need to talk to yourself about this, sometimes it's being a good friend to another person, encouraging them to practice meditation. What are you doing? You're encouraging yourself or this other person to develop more mindfulness. And as they become a little more mindful, more calm, more clear, they see the truth. And when you see the truth, you can understand or know the truth, you can accept the truth. So you notice when you're more mindful, you can be with some physical discomfort, feelings of tiredness, aches and pains, illness and so on, better without suffering. You can be a friend to yourself when you're mindful. Oh, it's like this, the pain in my legs feels like this, the tiredness of my body, maybe now it's late in the day for some of you. It's late in the day, I feel tired, worn out, but you can have a good attitude to that, be a friend to yourself as you're experiencing these things, because you're mindful. And you just know, this is the way it is, a human body is like this. Because as you become more mindful, you separate between the physical body and the mind that knows. Object and knower of the object. The body and then the one who knows the body, the mind. Most of the day there's no separation, we're just caught up in the suffering and the changes, and we grab onto pleasure all the time, of course. We get a little bit of relief from suffering and we enjoy some pleasures through the day, but they don't last. So then we keep falling back into suffering and becoming aware of pain. But if we're not mindful, we react with more suffering to any painful experience. But imagine now you're developing this mindfulness and this ability to contemplate experience. You're like now you're being a good friend to yourself, and instead of just reacting and suffering more out of your experience, you're just knowing it. Oh, it's like this. This human body gives me aches and pains and discomforts. It's like this, and that's the way it is. And there's no one to blame for that, and there's no need to get upset or suffer with that. It's really something just to be known. And that's the mind of the good friend, the mindfulness that just knows, oh, it's like this. And a good friend doesn't increase your suffering. So whether your own mind is being a good friend to itself, or you're giving some words of advice and encouragement to another person and you're being a friend to them, your aim is not to increase the suffering of their experience or your experience. It's the opposite, it's to reduce suffering. So if you can bring mindfulness up for yourself or encourage someone else to be mindful, it's one of the most friendly, best things you can do for a person. We need more friends in the world encouraging us to be mindful. Because it gives us the best chance to understand the basic reality that this body is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not a self that we can control and command. It's a physical thing that is subject to change and ultimately degenerates, disintegrates with age, and then fades away. The mind can know that through, and particularly through meditation. So any encouragement you give to yourself or to someone else is helping you to see that truth, accept that truth, know that truth. It's the best act of kindness you can do for yourself or for others. Get them to meditate. If you have a friend who's so stressed they can't meditate, and sometimes that's the case, maybe they're too ill, too tired, too confused, too stressed, well, at the very least you can meditate for that friend and be a friend for them in that way. You just sit down and meditate, whether you're with them or in another place, you can send your thoughts to them and wish them well, and wish them, if you're going to wish your friend well, what do you really wish for them? You wish them to be more mindful, so they can contemplate the Dhamma and free their mind from delusions, wrong views and opinions, wrong thinking, different states of suffering. Your wish is that they can be mindful enough and investigate the Dhamma enough that they can let those things go. The true friend. So whether you're actually giving them advice or just meditating for them, that's how we can be a friend to each other. Of course, there's many practical things we can do as well. Words of advice, things that help to calm someone down who's stressed, things that soothe. If they're physically ill, or any kind of support with care, medication, different kinds of support. If it's someone who's elderly, well, maybe slightly different kinds of support, but we can give physical support as well as emotional support to people. But ultimately our aim is, we're being a true friend, is to develop mindfulness and encourage others to develop more mindfulness and then contemplate. Just come to terms with the basic truths of life, is that things are impermanent, things don't last. What's impermanent is suffering. Because it's impermanent, it's subject to degeneration. What's impermanent, it cannot be a self because it doesn't last. Getting people to the point where they can see that is the best act of friendship you can give. So if somebody's right at the end of their life, to give that insight or encourage them to have that insight so they can be calm, let go of their body, it would be one of the greatest gifts you could give a friend. Help them to die peacefully. Or maybe someone younger who's just stressed about life, getting them to bring up more mindfulness and contemplate, their mood of stress, the worry, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, is not them. It's just a mood. It's just a mental state that arises and ceases. if you can do that, it's like the greatest kind of act of friendship to help someone to free them from their stress. It's amazing to see when you see Dhamma teachers do that. I've been lucky enough to live with and spend time with many different Dhamma teachers, and they all have their own ways. But somebody is suffering, and the teacher, one of Ajahn Chah's favourite lines was, they say, "Oh, I'm so stressed, I'm so worried about this, I'm thinking about this all the time, this problem." It's just thought. Ajahn Chah loved to say, "Oh, it's just thought." Because thought in itself is nothing. It's just a mental phenomena that arises and ceases. Somebody who's practiced mindfulness and see that can do that. They can joke. They say, "Oh, it's just a thought. No big deal. It's just a thought." When we're on our own, maybe we are not yet mindful enough and don't have enough understanding to do that, so we get tangled up in our thoughts. That's why we need to practice mindfulness. But someone who's a Dhamma friend may just be enough, their presence and their words, a few simple words, "Oh, it's just a thought. Don't believe it, don't make a big deal out of it." Maybe that's enough to help. Or when we make mistakes, someone to reassure us. Or when we're making a wrong decision, an error based on some mental defilement that's come up, and we're engaging in hostility with another human being, and someone reminds us just to forgive and let go and move on. Or we're being too selfish in a situation, and someone encourages us to relax a bit and think of others, not just yourself. Whatever, the words of advice can be invaluable. That's the Dhamma friend, the value of the Dhamma friend who helps us. Sometimes it's the words of advice that point out karma at work, the workings of karma, cause and result. How when we say make bad karma, follow intentions rooted in greed, anger, delusion of one sort or another, then the consequences follow on, sometimes very quickly, sometimes slower. But the wise friend, the good friend, maybe points it out to you, say, "Oh, don't do that, you'll make some bad karma that will come back on you." Sometimes that can be the best advice, life-saving advice or life-improving advice. Don't say those words, don't do it. Don't engage in this retribution, revenge, just give it up, let it go, move on. And in the long run, it frees us from suffering. The timely words from a good friend can save us so much trouble. So whether we're the good friend to ourselves, reminding us what we have to do, or it could be someone else reminding us, that's part of the practice. When you understand suffering more yourself, you can see it in others and their conduct as well. Maybe you can help them. This is one of the best kinds of help we can give. Of course, if someone's just suffering the basic problems of life, need food and shelter, medical support, well, that may be the priority. But if someone has all those things, then often it's a bit of Dhamma teaching, reminding them to act in a skillful way when they're tempted to act in an unskillful way. That can be such a valuable thing. With kids as well. If you're a parent, to be a Dhamma friend to your kids. Bring them to the Dhamma. Bring them to hear the Dhamma or contemplate the Dhamma in the best way you can. So they have some skills. We were talking now about that earlier, the story I sometimes tell about the naughty novice, the kid who was a teenager whose parents brought him to the monastery and gave him to me to look after. And he was somebody who was just mischievous at that time of his life. He's an adult now, I don't think he's mischievous anymore, but the mischievous young novice who was just stubborn, refusing to listen to good advice, refusing to take the advice of the Dhamma friend, and constantly suffering because of it. He just didn't understand karma, cause and result, or action and reaction. So always having to point this out to him, and often it was after the events. He would make some bad karma. It was only when the results came up that he realized after the event. Even though I was trying to talk him through it and warn him all the time, he didn't quite get it. It's very common, isn't it? You have some, particularly young people, they just make mistakes. It's part of what they do, perhaps. If you can give them some words of advice, help them through. Or best of all, avoid things. So this young novice who came to stay with me, he didn't like living in the jungle in Thailand. It was too many insects, too hot. Everything, all the surfaces were too hard. There was no furniture, no cushions. In those days, we just had wooden huts with simple mats on the floors, and no electricity, and no fan, and everything was difficult for a young teenager living in the jungle. Didn't know how to practice mindfulness, didn't understand karma and the Buddhist teachings. Yeah, it was quite a challenging time. So he did, in one way he did very well, but at the same time he also kept giving in to his stronger mental defilements. So the first thing he didn't like was all the insects, and he hated having to see ants, or sometimes you would get bitten by ants, because they bite. That's what ants do when you step on them or they get onto your skin, they'll bite you. And he didn't like that, and he felt that this was somehow unfair, that he should have to endure ant bites, ant stings. So one day I came to visit him at his hut, and he was standing there with a box of matches, and he lit each match one after the other and was just burning ants who were trying to walk up onto his hut, get onto his hut, going up the staircase. So he's just burning one ant after another after another. I said, don't do that, you're a novice monk, you've got to keep the precepts. If you're a novice monk or a lay practitioner on 8 precepts or a fully ordained monk, the more you break your precepts, the worse the karma, because you've undertaken to keep precepts. You're really going against your own goodness. So I was encouraging him not to do that. I said, don't do that, just be patient, or get away from the ants if you don't like them, but don't kill them. But he refused to listen. So I said, well, be careful. It can come back on you. I wasn't laughing when I said it, I'm laughing now. So anyway, he just kept doing it all morning. It was his morning activity, was to try and wipe out all the ants in the world. He probably did a few hundred, I guess. And then later that night, he was sleeping, and about 1, 2 a.m. in the middle of the night, when the jungle was quiet, everyone was either asleep or some of the monks may have been meditating, there was this blood-curdling scream through the jungle, resounding around the hillside. And me being the guide to the mentor to this young novice, I had to think, oh dear, what's happened? I had to rush over to see what was happening to him at his hut. And this hornet, you get big hornets in Thailand with big stings, had come and it landed on his fly screen door to his hut, which he had, which did a good job of keeping out most of the insects, but not all, because it did have a gap between the door and the floor. And this hornet somehow had landed on the fly screen door, walked down to the floor, and then walked under the door, walked into the room, gone straight for this novice, walked up his leg and then stung him on the buttocks. And they're very painful. I've never been stung by a hornet, but many monks have, I know, and they all say, oh, very painful, very painful. So when he had calmed down and we found him some medication for his new hornet sting, I taught him about karma. I said, if morning you're killing ants, middle of the night you get stung by a hornet, this is what we call instant karma. Learn a lesson. And he did, because he was intelligent. And he said, I'm never going to kill ants again. I said, yeah, I could have told you that already. I did tell you that already. But at least he learned later on. So he stopped killing ants. But unfortunately, his mischievous behavior started to come out in other ways. So we gave him a job emptying the rubbish in the monastery, which meant taking a push cart. In Thailand, you have push carts, collecting rubbish from the kitchen and taking it to the big rubbish bins, which are later then taken away by the local rubbish collector. And instead of doing the job nicely and properly, he would use it as a time to let off steam and have fun. So he would push his push cart full of rubbish as fast as he could downhill to have some fun. I said, don't do that because you'll crash and the rubbish will go everywhere and we'll all have to waste a lot of time picking it up. And he just would laugh wickedly and go, ha, 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 ha. And so I said, well, be careful. Remember, I even told him, I said, remember the hornet? What happened when you killed the ants and the hornet came? Maybe this is going to be similar. He said, ha, 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 I don't care. No, it won't. This is not ants. I'm not killing anything. So off he went rushing down the hill, and he pushed his push cart so fast he went over the edge of a hill and completely scattered all the rubbish and made a mess, which in itself was annoying but not such a big deal. But then of course he fell over and scraped his leg and hurt his leg. So I said, you see, instant karma. And basically every day he lived in the monastery, he was in the monastery for a month or so. There was an occasion like this. The next one I seem to remember was when he was hungry and we had to sit and meditate before the meal. And all the monks are sitting there meditating mindfully, dealing with their feelings of tiredness and hunger. And I said, just sit there, be patient. It's not long, maybe 20 minutes. And he couldn't resist. He said, I'm so hungry. When's the food coming? So he started complaining to all the other monks, when's the food coming? When's the food coming? I said, patience, patience. It will come, it will come. In the end, he couldn't wait, so he started thumping his monk's bowl lid. We have bowls and we have a lid on the bowl. And he started thumping it, bang, 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 like a drum, to express his displeasure that the food was served slowly. So I said, don't do that, maybe more karma will happen. And karma did happen, instant karma this time. The abbot, Luang Por Anand, because he was being so naughty, had to give him a little bit of a punishment. And the way you get punished in a monastery is not anything really serious. But he said, well, you're being really stubborn today, so after the meal you're going to have to clean out the toilets, which is a useful job, something good to do. So he was given that task. So after the meal, he went across to clean the toilets. But of course, during the meal, a viper, snake, went into the toilets and curled up and was having a nice nap in the cool toilets. And that's a very popular place for snakes in the jungle when it's hot. So our naughty novice went in with his bucket and his mop to clean the toilet. He was complaining again, as usual. And he went in, and then again, the blood-curdling screams, came running out. I said, why are you running? What's the problem? He said, there's a viper, look, 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 and pointing his fingers. And the viper came shooting out, because the viper was more scared than the little novice, because vipers don't like blood-curdling screams either. And so the viper went one way and the novice went another. So every day of the time this novice spent in the monastery was like this. But every day myself or the other monks would give him some instruction on practice, mindfulness, calming down, being patient, reflecting on the Dhamma, reflecting on karma, cause and effect. And we found that after the end of his time in the monastery, he'd actually changed quite a lot. He'd grown up a lot. From being very wild, untamed. By the end of his time there, he was quite restrained and he understood not to kill. He could sit and wait for his meal patiently without complaining. And he didn't run around anymore, pushing the push carts over the hill, over the cliff. He actually changed quite a lot in 1 month. Very good example of how if you have good Kalyana Mitta, good Dhamma friends around, then you can change. And I'm sure everyone has their own examples of this. When you give some Dhamma to someone, maybe not just once, sometimes it has to be repeatedly, doesn't it? You can help them. You can help them by encouraging them to let go of their worst defilements, their wildness, their greed, their anger, their rage, their selfishness, their laziness, whatever it may be. Just giving them that instruction and also doing it for yourself. You also have to be the example, don't you? When you have your own mental defilements come up and they cause you trouble, you have to give yourself the right instructions. Be a Dhamma friend to yourself. If we don't practice, then of course this probably won't make much sense. But as you practice the Dhamma more, the value of being a Dhamma friend for yourself and then for others becomes clearer, I'd say. And it also becomes more natural. You can see quite clearly, if you give people advice, encouraging them in the way of Dhamma, keep precepts, be generous, be more mindful, let go of the more negative mind states, to be patient when the negative mind states come up, but then to try and work to let them go. If you give them the right advice, then they benefit from it. If you talk to yourself in the right way, you benefit from it too. You may even use it as a reflection, a daily reflection. Today, am I being a true Dhamma friend to myself, or am I being my worst enemy today? Am I, telling myself to do the wrong thing, hold the grudge, be selfish, be greedy, be lazy, be stubborn, cause trouble for myself, cause trouble for others, receive the instant karma, or am I encouraging myself to let go of the stubbornness, the greed, the anger, the whatever, and am I encouraging others to let go of their greed, their anger, their delusions? Is one way of how we might define the Dhamma practice. Are you increasing defilement or are you reducing it? Are you encouraging others to increase their mental defilements and therefore suffer more? Or are you helping them to reduce them, at least encouraging them in the right way to reduce their defilements? So maybe I'll leave you with this teaching tonight, and afterwards we can have a chance if anyone has any questions. I'll do my best to answer for you.